Welcome to this special edition of the TheologyMom podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm Krista Bontrager. I'm a public theologian and Christian apologist, and this is the channel where I offer teaching about the Bible and theological commentary on social issues. And yes, I'm continuing to report about Biola University. Someone asked me the other day on social media whether I'm obsessed with Biola. I told that person I have 545 videos on my channel, and I believe that 5 of them are about Biola. So no, I'm not obsessed. But I am making this podcast a special edition and not the main weekly Monday podcast because I don't want this topic to take over the whole platform. And for those who are interested in the topic, you can continue to follow it. If you're not, that's fine. I'm going to still keep doing my regular Bible teaching. I also want to let you know that I'm not monetizing the Biola videos, although they've done very well on my channel. My heart is not to make money off of this whole unfortunate situation. My channel is not a scandal sheet. I'm not a call-out channel, but I have focused some amount of attention on Biola because I do dearly love the institution. My hope all along has been to just try to do some good. The letters that I've received over the years from devastated parents who feel deceived and duped by the Biola administration for selling them one version of Biola only to have it gobble their kid up in their progressive by their progressive professors. These letters have just been truly heartbreaking to me. I just got another one this morning, and maybe I can try in some small way to be a voice for them and to warn others. What I hope to accomplish today is really 2 things. First, I want to give some updates about how things are continuing to develop at Biola. And then second, I want to share the big thing that I have changed my mind about over the weekend with regard to the kinds of conversations I'm going to have about Biola. So make sure to stay tuned to the end for that. Now, with all of that said, I want to start by playing a clip from my friend, Dr. Thaddeus Williams. He is a professor of theology at Biola University, and he did a nice recap recently about what's been happening at Biola and what updates have developed as a result of the research that I've been doing on my channel, as well as the conversations that my friends, Elisa Childers, my ministry partner, Monique Duson, and reporter Megan Basham have done as well. So let's check that out.
Let's dive in. Megan Basham's article. Let me address her sort of more broadly, including my friends Elisa Childers, Krista Bontrager, and Monique Duson here. I heard literally yesterday from somebody who's very, very high up the chain of command at Biola that there is a gratitude when folks who aren't inside the university expose things. I think the quote was something like, "The light, though painful, can bring healing." I'm paraphrasing here.
Just a really quick aside for those on the audio podcast, a picture of the provost, Dr. Matt Hall, was flashed on the screen. So I think that that's who Thaddeus was talking to in this conversation. All right, let's continue.
But this particular very high up leader expressed appreciation because there's many things that frankly weren't on the university's radar. And there is real value in folks out there drawing attention to things that might have flown under the radar for too long. And so I have seen positive impact from some of the controversies swirling over the last month. As many of you know, the gender housing policy that I believe Elisa Childers, my dear friend, she broke that story. TheologyMom followed up shortly thereafter, Krista Bontrager. And I think we can all celebrate that real positive change happened, and it happened quickly on that front. So there's one specific. Many people criticized me and Sean and Eric and Fred for not addressing that in our response video. And the reason for that, just to be clear and transparent, was we had already found out shortly before we recorded that the policy was already being rewritten and that the new policy would be hitting the public shortly. So we didn't address it specifically, not because we were being evasive or anything like that. We knew positive change was just right around the corner. So that's a first specific. Second, in Megan Basham's article, she highlighted the fact that somebody with a whole lot of power in the counseling center had publicly signed on with an amicus brief arguing against conversion therapy. Now, there's a lot here, but let me just lay out some facts insofar as I see them.
Just for the sake of clarity, I also broke this story. Megan and I were working on the story about the head of the Biola Counseling Center separately. And then I just coincidentally found out that she was working on the same story. So I delayed the release of my podcast. She and I had some back and forth on text behind the scenes because I wanted to honor and respect the work that she was doing to try to break the story. But I also broke that story on my channel a few weeks ago in the 2-hour deep dive that my friend Andrew Rodriguez and I did into the gender policies and practices at Biola. And so you'll want to take a look at that. I'll link to that in the description.
Conversion therapy has been weaponized in the last 10 years legally, is that conversion therapy, it's a term intended to drum up images of somebody with electrodes attached or enduring electroshock therapy to sort of shock out the gay. There's all these sort of terrifying mental images that those terms drum up. But the way it's been redefined legally is if I had a student in my office who says, "Hey, Dr. Williams."
And just as a quick aside, like another version of conversion therapy, I think is like extreme deliverance practices, trying to cast out someone's demons for gay issues. That would be considered conversion therapy. I think also it's a version of like pray the gay away and that sort of a thing. But it's a very ambiguous term. I did a whole podcast about conversion therapy with my friend Joe Dallas. If you want to check that out, just go to my channel. I think the title of it is something like Exodus International President talks about or explains conversion therapy or something like that.
I'm struggling with same-sex attraction, and I offer to pray for them, or I walk them through a biblical case that the way we flourish sexually is in male-female marriage unions. By the legal tactics of some folks on the left, particularly in California in recent years, I would be engaging in conversion therapy and therefore liable under the law. And so Biola, I serve on a committee appointed by President Corey several years ago called the Religious Freedom Task Force, appointed by Barry Corey, where being in a deep blue state like California, understand that there are powers that be in Sacramento who want deeply for Biola to be a ghost town, for there to be tumbleweeds rolling through the empty halls, to close our doors, precisely because we have an official statement on sexuality that affirms biblical gender distinctions, precisely because we teach that. And part of that committee has been dealing with specific legislation that has been designed to shut places like Biola down. And I can tell you my insider perspective is that at no point in any of those conversations was it, well, how do we bow the knee to gender ideology or queer theory so that we can survive? That has never been on the table. There have been several examples of us seeking legal exemptions on Title IX so that we can maintain our biblical convictions about sexuality. And so when we find out, as Megan Basham broke the story, that somebody with a lot of power in our counseling department was on the other side of that question, actually opposing the religious freedoms we cherish at Biola to hold and maintain and live in sync with biblical gender distinctions. So let me say for the record, thank you, Megan, for bringing that to light. If we have a Biola employee who is LGBTQ affirming, that is clearly out of sync with our official doctrinal statement that all faculty needs to sign afresh every year. That is clearly at odds with Biola's strong stance on religious freedom and God's beautiful distinctions between male and female. I have heard from folks who are higher on the chain of command than me that they were not aware of that until this story broke, and I am assured that the appropriate steps are being taken. Another specific issue that broke just this last Sunday by my friend Monique Duson at the Center for Biblical Unity was something that came across her desk. That is a art professor at Biola University who was engaging in some kind of performance art that was Monique was very generous and charitable. She framed it as, I got questions. Well, with the receipts she brought, I don't have questions. I think it's abundantly clear this professor was engaging in the promotion of occultic divination and anti-Christian spirituality. There's just no other way to look at the evidence. The evidence is pretty damning. So I was utterly shocked and horrified by that news. Everybody I know at Biola, when they found out, were equally shocked and horrified. I very quickly reached out to President Corey. Some conversations ensued where I was in contact with our provost, Matt Hall, and I was told that once before Monique's story broke and these things came to light, that things were handled. That professor is not taught for the year 2025 and will not be teaching. There is no renewed contract for that professor. Another specific that's been raised concerns the Biola sanctioned group, The Dwelling. I think many of those concerns are extremely valid. I know Greg Kokel recently did a podcast at Stand to Reason where he raised some of his serious concerns with that, and I have nothing but a hearty amen to those concerns.
And again, I want to say that I did a 2-hour deep dive on The Dwelling and the practices at Biola about discipleship and care for students who struggle with same-sex attraction. I think Biola has a lot of confusing messages that they've sent over the years, in spite of their position statements and their policies. It's very conflicting. We're going to get more into that later in this stream. All right, let's finish this out. We've got about 10 more seconds.
All I can say there is stay tuned. I think folks are going to be really encouraged to see what comes out of some of that public critique.
Okay, so there's a lot there, some good updates. I appreciate those and glad for the changes that Biola's made. Even in spite of all of that, I don't feel optimistic. And I'm going to explain more about that in a few minutes. But one of the things that really concerns me about this video is I love Thaddeus. First of all, there's no problem between Thaddeus and I. Like, if people are talking about division, there's no division between us, like zero. There's zero division. I have respect, as I've said publicly, for all 4 gentlemen who were on the previous podcast with Thaddeus. I got no animosity toward them at all. They're faithful brothers. But what concerns me about Thaddeus's videos is that he doesn't work in the Biola administration. He's a theology professor. And now, I do know that Thaddeus serves on various committees, and some of them do have make policies, or he has influence on policies. I think that's great. It's part of being a full-time faculty member. You have to serve on various committees. That's all very normal. Glad to have a voice like Thaddeus's on those committees. But as he says at the beginning of this podcast, he isn't representing Biola in any official capacity on this podcast. They didn't ask him to do it. In fact, let's just hear what he has to say.
Into the specifics here, just a few disclaimers right at the outset. Number one, I'm not an official spokesperson for the university. Nobody in administration put me up to this. I wasn't commissioned to make these videos or anything like that. I'm just a dude. I am just a lowly theology professor who has friends on both sides of this, and sharing my input, my admittedly limited take. That's it.
And I think that this is great. I appreciate Thaddeus's willingness to provide these updates as he's able, but it raises in me a bigger question, and that is, where is the Biola administration exactly? So far, they haven't said a lot. There hasn't been a lot of official words. Just late last week, there was an article in the Chimes, which is the student-run newspaper. As you can see here, the headline reads, Biola updates its sexuality, gender, and relationships policy. In a press release, Dr. Corey reiterated Biola's unwavering commitment to biblical values. And this is dated November the 19th. Fairly short article, but this part was sort of interesting to me. Mark Muha, the vice president for student development, explained that a couple of Christian podcasters, authors, and influencers recently drew our attention to areas where the language in the past version of Biola's student handbook about sexuality was not as clear as it could be. And they went on to articulate them with greater clarity. He also states that President Corey has commissioned Mr. Muha and other Biola leaders to give deeper thought as to how we will continue to care for our beloved students here at Biola with regard to same-sex attraction in the days ahead. We will spend time listening, reflecting, and working on a plan forward. We will keep the community informed as things develop. Now, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to not go into all of that right now. But I think that, this is a fairly brief statement, but to my knowledge, there's not a lot coming from the administration. There's this, and then there was a very long press release from the Biola president, Dr. Barry Corey. And again, this is a public document on the Biola website. It's titled Biola University's Unwavering Commitment to its Mission Fidelity. And Barry Corey says, every once in a while, it is prudent for us to take a look at language of our Biola University handbooks and make sure the tone and wording reflect the substance of our unchanging biblical values and how we may live even more robustly with these standards. After revisiting our community standards in the student handbook related to sexuality, gender, and marriage, we can see where wording may not have been adequately reflected Biola's unwavering commitment to our long-standing biblical orthodoxy on these topics. We have clarified this language to ensure there is no ambiguity with our long-held biblical positions. Okay, I appreciate this statement. It's a little soft for me, like looking at the tone and the wording, where words like might and that sort of thing. But I'm gonna have some grace on that. But the bottom line is they changed the policies. I'm glad for it. As I've said previously, I think the new policies are an improvement. But then this memo went on and on and on and on and on and on about all of the good of Biola. So it's like, yeah, they had a short, brief acknowledgement of, hey, there may have been some problems here, and we're looking into it. But I just found it interesting that the vast majority of the memo was about all of the good. And I have some thoughts about that. Because while I do appreciate that the administrators admit that the work that myself and Elisa and Monique and Megan have done was the prompt behind their revision of the gender policies. They kind of admit that in the Chimes article, although they don't mention that we're alumni. Monique and I are both alumni. I found that sort of interesting, which makes me think that the policies would probably still be up on the Biola website if we hadn't pointed them out. That's a little concerning to me because they've been up there for several years. The current or the previous iteration of them had been up there for quite a long time, I think since 2018. But really what Biola wants you to focus on, they want alumni and donors to believe that they are staying true to their statement of faith. Like that was clear from Barry Corey's memo that is what he wants you to believe, that so we messed up on these little policies and it's prudent for us to look at them and maybe bring them more clarity. But really what we want you to do is have 14 scrolls of the mouse about all the good things that we've done and how they're staying true to their statement of faith, which I commend, as I've said repeatedly, that they haven't changed a word of their articles of faith in 100 years. But it's also important to understand the difference between position statements and policies and practices. And what I'm talking about, and I keep trying to make this clear, is that I'm talking about policies and practices that I feel like are out of alignment with the statement of faith. But I think I've changed my mind about that, which I'm going to explain in a few minutes. But I did an entire, like I said, it's 2-hour discussion about the importance of institutional alignment between policies and practices and the statement of faith. So I'm trying to draw attention to the deeper issues, not just the statement of faith and how they haven't changed it in 100 years. I concede that point. I'm not arbitrating that point. I'm trying to get people to look at the deeper structural issues that aren't out in the public, the culture and the practices. And in other words, how the statement of faith is lived out in the real world on campus. And in my journey on this issue, it is far more difficult to expose the culture and the practices on campus or to get people to believe you, because so much of it is hidden to the outside world. Things like residence life and now chapels, like chapels are almost completely hidden now, whereas Biola used to put them all publicly. Now there are hardly any chapels from the last year are up on their channel. And so it's really hard to expose what's happening on campus in the everyday life and residence life and just the ethos of the students, as the young people would say, the vibe, because it's so hidden from the rest of the world. And Biola only shows parents and donors what they want them to see. And that is this picture of the faithfulness and the articles of faith and being unchanged in 100 years. So I wanted to take just a little peek behind the curtain to show you what the Biola culture is like, even though it's really hard to expose this. But the comments on the Chimes article were very interesting, and I think gives us just a little peek behind the curtain of what the Biola culture is really like. Now, again, I want to say that these are public comments. I'm not trying to dox anyone. They're publicly available. These are screen caps that I did myself. But this one is from a Biola journalism grad, allegedly. This is what he's claiming. And he says, as someone who was open about being gay in my journalism classes, my best friend also helped establish the dwelling back in 2018, 2019. And then he goes on, it would have been nice to also hear from an LGBTQ plus student on this, like have a quote from them in the article, and perhaps even a student who supports this decision. So, but what I find interesting about this is that this former student is claiming that they were openly gay at Biola. So here we have, again, this disconnect between the statements, the public statements, and the culture and the practices of Biola. Like, why are these things not in alignment? This has been a long-standing problem that obviously this student felt okay about being out in public at Biola. Let's take a look at another one. This one says, pandering to GOP think tanks. I guess that's us. I guess we're a think tank now. I don't know. I cannot roll my eyes hard enough. However, in all caps, I want to remind people that DBC, which is Dr. Barry Corey, and Biola as an entity continue to abandon LGBT students. God continues to work in queerphobic, misogynistic, racist spaces. As a queer alumni of Biola, God weaved amazing mentors and peers that guided me toward deeper spiritual formation and exposed me to larger theological debates and scholarship that many professors were gleefully ignorant on. Truly a miracle to worship Jesus and unapologetically affirm all who God made me to be. If you are queer at Biola right now, know that you come from a rich tradition of ancestors and elders that are with you, and know that your God is with you. DBC, May you be humbled enough to meet the cosmic Christ and know the queerness is unambiguously part of God's divine nature. Okay, this is a very interesting comment because, first of all, this person is alleging that they are a queer alumni of Biola, but I would wondering, I don't know this to be a fact, but are these amazing mentors and peers that this person talks about that were helpful to this person in their journey during Biola years, were those Biola staff and peers? Who were these amazing mentors and peers? And if that's true, were they the ones that exposed the students to the larger theological debate and scholarship? This, to me, again, goes to what kind of culture is Biola really inculcating in its students or allowing? Yes, on paper, they are saying they have fidelity to their position statements, but to so-called queer alumni, they are noticing the disconnect and they are wrestling with us. I want to show one more comment here. This commenter, someone named quote unquote John Adams, which I think is an alias, claims on his Facebook bio that he works at Biola in the marketing department. I couldn't find record of anyone on the Biola website with the name John Adams, but maybe this is a fake account. I don't know. But for somebody who's claiming to be a Biola staff member, here's what he says. It's a pretty convenient slogan that the issues of male and female are a black and white issue. That's what he's responding to. But it collapses the moment you look at the actual biblical narratives or the complexity of creation itself. Reducing the entire image of God or imago Dei to quote unquote black and white categories is less faithful to scripture and more faithful to bumper sticker theology. If anything, the gray exists because reality refuses to fit the oversimplified boxes that we want. Now, again, this is an interesting comment to me that somebody is kind of taking issue with the new gender policies, apparently, and that this person allegedly works at Biola. Now, I don't know who this person is. And again, I couldn't find Mr. John Adams on the Biola website, but I do think that this comment is interesting. In fact, he also makes another comment. Mr. Adams has this comment. He says, if scripture was clear, quote unquote, clear, as you claim, Christians wouldn't have spent 2 millennia arguing over how to interpret it. Declaring every modern complexity, quote unquote, sexual immorality is just an attempt to skip the hard work of exegesis. If anything, the loudest calls to, quote unquote, stand for the Bible usually mask the shallowest engagement with it. Now, again, I think that this is an interesting comment because he's implying that he holds to a gay affirming position, that this is not a black and white issue, and that the modern complexity of sexual immorality skips the hard work of the deeper exegesis of the text. This just sounds like, to me, a good old-fashioned progressive who's wanting to reinterpret the Bible. But I bring this up because this person claims to work at Biola. So where is the vetting in this? And I don't know. I have questions. Okay, one more from this same Chimes article. This person is from a comment on Instagram. I am an alum and ex-Biola professor for 12 years. Many of my colleagues and I provided safe spaces for our queer students, counseling, affirming, and providing resources. This was true with the majority of my department, and to my knowledge, at least 4 other departments. Biola is an outdated dichotomy. Many professors in the humanities, arts, and sciences, as well as a growing majority of the student body, are progressive toward gender ideology and inclusion, while the administration markets itself as a conservative oasis pandering to the whims of the GOP, completely ignoring the massive paradigm shift of many Gen Z students toward love and inclusion, even in spaces of worship. Many of my prior students have openly questioned Biola's stance against the LGBTQIA plus community and expressed discomfort at the church's rejection of queer and trans Christians, some even devoting their research projects to that very topic. The fact that the dwelling, and before that, in my time, the Biola Queer Underground exists with massive attendance should signal a need for institutional reform. Biola is conflating the political and the spiritual, and it is absolutely disgusting. Queer Christians exist. There is zero difference between our faith and their faith and our own. God loves us equally. Shame on Biola for being so outrageously hateful and bigoted. Now, this is a revelatory comment. This really pulls back the curtain on the Biola culture. This is a former professor of 12 years openly stating that she and her colleagues in multiple departments helped their queer students, their trans students. But she is also recognizing and identifying the very thing that I have been pointing out as well. I'm just on the other side of the conversation. And that is the hypocrisy or the discontinuity between the public facing statements to alumni and donors of we are a conservative oasis. I like that terminology. And the behind the scenes practices and culture of Biola, that Biola is admitting progressive-leaning, gay-affirming students. What are we doing? So you can tell me on paper that you are hiring certain people, but the truth is there is a big discontinuity between the hiring and the policies, the practices, and the positions, okay? Or I should say the practices and the positions. But there's also a discontinuity in who the admissions department is admitting into Biola. And so, but this is the much harder work, is figuring out what is actually happening on campus. What is the actual campus vibe in the dormitories and the residents' life? So even though Biola has this great position statement, how that position statement is being lived out in the culture is at best inconsistent. And I am not the only one who's noticing it. The progressives are also noticing, and we're both frustrated because Biola is trying to do this weird middle way between the two. Now, one theory that I've seen people raise in the comments, and Thaddeus kind of alluded to it in his video, is that perhaps the reason that Biola has these gender policies and practices was in order to accommodate being a deep blue state. After all, we do live in very liberal California. Biola is located in very liberal LA County. But let me offer an interesting counterexample for you to consider, and that is Masters University. Masters University is a little bit up the freeway from Biola, founded by John MacArthur, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago now, probably at least 30. And it is arguably even more conservative than Biola, since it requires all of its professors to affirm young earth creationism. Biola doesn't have that standard. And like Biola, Masters is also in California. It is also in Los Angeles County. They accept federal grants and Cal grants and Pell Grant loans. Those are federal money. And so I don't think that this is about California, because I've never heard of Masters having these kinds of problems of progressive professors teaching there for over a decade or getting tenure. I've never heard of masters having an entire diversity office or a diversity strategic plan. I've never heard of masters having chapel speakers who are soft rolling in social justice and liberation theology. I've never heard of masters having a group like the Dwelling or secret gay affirming professors or professors who do divination as performance art. And so while I can certainly say a big public thank you to President Barry Corey and his legal team and all the people on the committee with Thaddeus who have done all the hard work at Biola over the decades to advocate and protect for religious freedom in our state. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for doing that. We also have to have some very honest and transparent conversations about decisions that were intentionally made by the Biola leadership over the last 2 decades. And at some point, there has to be some acknowledgement that these aren't just little oopsies. Like, they were intentional. Go read Danny Pascal's court files linked on my website at theologymom.com on my extended blog post about chronicling issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He recounts in his court files numerous discussions with Barry Corey about the desire to engage in diversity hiring. And from what I can tell, Pascal was part of the progressive drift at Biola during his tenure there until he was passed over for promotion and fired. Then he took Biola to court for passing him over because he was white. But Biola has progressive leaning staff historically and even now, today, right now, this minute, because they made intentional decisions to hire these people. I think personally, this is an opinion, I think it's a smokescreen to say, well, we just live in a blue state. That's why we did these things. No, because Masters University has all the same challenges that Biola does. Same state, same county. But they have arguably done a better job at preserving their heritage than Biola has. That's an opinion. But we need to have some honest discussion about very real decisions about hiring that were made and the intentionality behind those decisions. There was an intentional 12 to 15-year effort to embed social justice, liberation theology, critical race theory, and diversity, equity, and inclusion structurally throughout the university. Now, I am grateful that some of these efforts that Biola has engaged in to apparently, seemingly, possibly pull back from these bad ideas. I think Biola has canceled the strategic plan, although there has been no public announcement to that effect. But they did make a big public announcement when they were going down that path. They did dissolve the Diversity and Inclusion Office on July 1st, 2024. They hired a new provost in 2022. But they have not made any public comments of, hey, we're coming into a better mind. We're changing direction. We see where we went wrong. Like, none of that I have heard or seen. And I think that there is an important reality lurking behind all of this. And that is that the top level leadership hired these people and put these policies in place. And those people are still there. President Barry Corey and the Board of Trustees. Now, let me read a comment to this effect by my friend, Dr. Corey Miller. He is the president and CEO of Ratio Christi, and with all transparency, he's also on the Academic Advisory Council for the Center for Biblical Unity. But I think his comment along these lines really is a much better summary of what I'm trying to say. Let me start with the second paragraph here. Barry Corey refused to meet with those of us over a petition to save Biola. This was back in 2020. I was the advisor. Anthony Costello spearheaded the petition with the team, and Thaddeus and Scott Ray had a quote-unquote pre-meeting of sorts with us on Zoom. And then again, when it was Monique, JP Moreland, and myself scheduled to meet with Scott Ray and Barry Corey and the diversity director, chief diversity officer, for Monique's former, I'm going to change this, it wasn't her roommate, it was a friend. Corey Miller says, I booked flights, but Barry Corey canceled on us, only choosing to meet with Monique, whose meeting barely allowed touching the subject. These dates go as far back as when the woke hit the fan in 2020 to 2021. But Barry Corey has overseen the last 5 to 10 years of problems. I would say it's almost more like 20 years, including bringing on some board members whose own public speaking outed them as woke. I'm going to substitute the word here for advocating for things like critical race theory and DEI and social justice, and him hiring an entire diversity department whose job was administering the poison and whose department eventually got cut for financial, not ideological reasons, as I understand it. Now, yes, when Biola cut the diversity and inclusion office, they did it under the cover story. I think it's a cover story. That's an opinion. That's me. They said the reason they were doing that was for financial reasons, economic reasons. So instead of taking a bold stand of like, hey, we've had a better mind or we're changing our position or we're changing our strategy, it was like, no, we're just paring down this department. We're shuffling some people over to other departments and putting our chief diversity officer on sabbatical. It was weird. It was a weird memo. I think that Corey is bringing up a very important issue here, though. My friend Corey Miller is that is about the importance of leadership, and that Barry Corey, who is still currently the president, has made a lot of these decisions with intentionality and leading the university down a particular path. This was on purpose, all the while putting up the public front of we've never changed. We are an outpost against progressive ideology. Now, my friends over at the Kirkwood Center also made comments along these lines. These brothers are all Biola grads too. They're friends of mine. And in full transparency, I had Tony on my podcast recently. He's been on a few times now. My friend Dr. Jacob Daniel was also he's on our academic advisory council at the Center for Biblical Unity. But I do want to play this clip from their conversation and then comment on it, because they are also talking about this issue of leadership and hiring. Let's check that out.
And this was very interesting. I really appreciate it. Dr. Sanders does say this in his comment about Biola, is like, you get these hiring committees and it's always like, okay, we'll hire someone just to the left, and then it reconsolidates just to the left. It's going one way because there's outside pressure on Biola to destroy them from the left. And Biola is going to, and I know Christians hate hearing this because they like to think that universities, they sort of gather around, they pray, and they just do whatever they believe is right. And there's somehow isolated from social pressure. They're not isolated from social, government, financial pressures. Right now, the social pressure has been going one way. If you don't do your LGBTQ stuff, we're going to pull funding from you. You're not going to have student loans anymore under the Biden administration. If you don't support these immigration things, you're going to get funding taken away from you. If you say these things, we're going to try to cancel and shut down a university. Like, they were going to use COVID policies, any policy they can, they're going to target their opposition. The right has not done that. And so there has been no practical incentive for Biola to really hear them out. And so when you see Christians coming out saying, okay, we need to escalate our view of say, okay, there needs to be legitimate practical threats that can damage the university. And they're like, that's not Christ like that. First of all, it's very Christian that there is judgment for sin. But if there is an absence of real practical consequences, it's hard to fault the university for sliding towards a person that will destroy the university, because it's very easy to say, well, if we're still alive, maybe we can do some good. But once the right can at least increase their level of like threat, then the university says, okay, if we're going to die anyways, then we might as well die for Christ. That's the position you want the university to get, because then it's going to trim all these peripheral fights down to what's really important. Now, specific things I do want to say, like, because I want to push back against like this, and this is like accountability courage thing, is like, you know, Sean McDowell said something about the sociology department. It was bad, and all of us can attest to this. We came out and said, hey, there's like bad stuff going on. I was writing articles against Dr. Christensen. He's just off the wall.
That's Brad Christerson, I think is his name. I believe he was one of the Biola professors who also, although I'm free to be corrected on this by anybody who sees this, I think he was one of the Biola professors who marched with Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
During 2020.
And then his posts and stuff.
In spite of COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, it's like open and well documented. But it's like, Sean McDowell's like, the sociology department's really bad. It was strange that we were at the beginning. We made hey, all this stuff is really bad. And they're like, you're not Christ-like. You're not doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And then now somewhere down the road, it was like, wait a minute. Oh, no, the sociology department has been bad. It's always been bad. And then you're like, oh, well, were any of the professors you fired, were they doing bad things? Like, well, everyone makes their mistakes and there's nuance and you're like, okay, well, what about the guy who led the sociology department? Was he bad? The department was bad? Or is this like some sort of there's some sort of blob out in the world who's responsible for these bad decisions and somehow it's been taken care of? And this is where I think Biola has put itself into like an authority crisis. And this is where I think the audience might be more informative is like, there needs to be pressure and Biola naturally is going to resist front-facing this pressure. And this is why there's the question of like, why did Dr. Williams do his podcast on this? Because he's in a weird position now. If he legitimizes the response by saying it was, TheologyMom, or if it was what Charlie Kirk said or these things, now he has sort of legitimized extra administrative control of the university. And once you've done that, now you're going to trigger a administrative crisis for the university. Now, I think it should be because I do think it has been incompetent for a very long time. But you do need to look at the power politics on this is like, they're now in a weird place where they're not able to make the right decisions. And so now there's immense external pressure and the right is now mounting greater and greater external pressure. Hopefully, there has to be some sort of like threat of damage. So the university has to make a choice, but they have to make the choice where they don't say, well, we only did it because TheologyMom did a podcast, because then it's like, oh, so TheologyMom was running the university. Oh, we're doing it because Charlie Kirk says, like, okay, so Charlie Kirk's running the university from his grave. Like, you can't. So there's now an authority crisis. They've sort of.
Well, and that's where, and as I said at the beginning, one of the things that clearly changed concretely that Elisa Childers referenced was the policy on gender and sexuality. And as you bring up, if that was purely reactionary, like it never would have happened had there been no Elisa Childers podcast.
Like I said, we do know now that from the quote in the Chimes that the administration is admitting that they did change the gender policies because of things that Elisa and I highlighted. Thaddeus confirmed that as well. But I think that Logan is right, that it puts Biola leadership in a tough position, because here's the thing. I could keep highlighting the problems and they could keep reacting to them. And we could just keep playing whack-a-mole. But at some point, that process only highlights the reality that they don't seem very proactive to audit their existing staff members. Here's this eye-popping moment from Dr. Fred Sanders from Thaddeus's previous podcast, the one that Logan was just referencing. Let's just watch that back and refresh our memory.
Yeah, I've probably been on 25 search committees while I've been here, most of them in my own department, but also in others. And what always is the temptation for a search committee is you get your 5 or 6 people together, you get hundreds of applications, and you're tempted to hire the person who's just slightly to the left of where the faculty consensus is. Like we can put up with that. It's not hard left, it's just a little further over, because that's what the stream of applicants is feeding you in our time. Mm. The problem is, as soon as you do that, you've reset the center so that the next time there's a hiring committee, you start from a position slightly to the left. No one's trying to move hard that direction, but it's that incremental change. And so it's every dang hiring committee, you got to hold out until you reconnect, not with the sociology of where you happen to be right now in the pool of people on the committee, but the principles and the fundamentals, and to hire from there.
Hiring is absolutely the critical factor in preserving any institution like Biola. Yes, position statements are foundational. Policies that align with those position statements are needed. but who you hire is what builds practices and culture at the institution. And that is how policies and positions are lived out in the real world of the dorms and the chapels and cafeteria conversations. When Monique and I talk to Christian school administrators or ministry leaders, almost always they can point to one or two specific hires who changed or shifted the entire culture of the ministry and led them down a progressive direction. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast, but just one or two people can make a very big difference. But what happens when you have like maybe a third of your staff who are progressive leaning? What impact do you think that is going to have? You can have the most robust and beautiful statement of faith in the world, but how will that be lived out behind the scenes? Now, going back to the recent article in the Chimes for a minute about the recent changes to the gender policy. Now, they don't make any mention about the head of the Biola Counseling Center situation or the art professor. And I get it, there's HR issues involved there, so they probably can't mention specifics about those cases. But it would be helpful if they would offer a public comment about just general missteps that they've made over the last, 15, 20 years in hiring progressive leaning people, and what changes in philosophy that donors and alumni can expect moving forward. Maybe they could explain how they vet people. These are questions. My friend Elizabeth Urbanovitz framed the question, I think, very well in a public comment on Thaddeus's latest video. I am a Biola alum. I love Biola, and I believe it is one of the few Christian institutions that hasn't given up orthodoxy. I agree with Elizabeth on this point. But I am deeply concerned that the leadership of Biola didn't address these issues until after several YouTubers called them out. This is a very important insight. What is to stop similar issues from arising again until other YouTube platforms point them out? This isn't a rhetorical question. If there's an answer, I would greatly appreciate knowing. I love Biola. I think this is a very well stated question. Is why did you wait until YouTubers like me pointed these problems out? And what's to prevent it from happening again in the future? Because after all, the same leadership is in place. Board members and Dr. Barry Corey. From where I sit as an outsider, it seems like Biola's strategy is just to wait for public people, podcasters, to point out problems that we're just using basic Google searches. And then send out extended memos from the president explaining how wonderful Biola is. Biola's public actions are telling me that they have a low priority interest in auditing their existing staff. This frustration was well stated in a public comment on Thaddeus's most recent video from a gentleman named James George. He says, how weak, how deceptive. Parents and students should not have to vet courses and or professors at Christian universities. That is what they pay the administration to do. If you cannot trust the administration of a Christian university, don't send children there to have supposed trusted mentors shape their worldview. That's a tough comment, but I understand where this gentleman is coming from. And there was a comment on Monique's live stream about the art professor that expresses, I think, a very similar sentiment. How is it possible that Biola leadership could have no clue this is going on? There is literally stuff posted on YouTube and public website that out these people. Even Biola's own website has it. Are they so lazy and disinterested in getting to know the very people they supervise? Now, again, this is a rough comment, but there's some truth here that I think needs to be looked at, because apparently I'm not the only one who's asking questions about the hiring process of Biola and kind of wondering what sort of audit practice is happening to existing staff behind the scenes. Because based on what I can see publicly, Biola still has a number of faculty and staff who advocate for various aspects of the critical social theories, social justice, and liberation theology. And I think I know why. I think I know why those people are still employed. And here's where I want to talk about how I've changed my mind. When I said in previous podcasts that I was calling Biola to publicly repent of past progressive hiring and embedding these postmodern ideologies into its very structure and hiring practices, I did that assuming that Biola wants to change and do better. But I realize now that I don't actually know if that's true. And judging by their public actions, I think that I'm uncertain where they stand or what their goals are. Now, I certainly hope that it's true that Biola wants to change and do better, but I don't know for a fact that that's true. And I've also been told, and I think I've mentioned this before, that it would be a legal catastrophe for the university to admit public wrongdoing. And, that makes me sad because, the cost to so many families has been profound. And that many of them that I've heard from, like, they tried to talk to the administration, they tried to understand what was happening, and the administration just denied that there was even a problem. And these people feel gaslit. And I would love for their pain to be acknowledged. And I would love to see public repentance happen, or at minimum, for there to be public clarity about how Biola is moving forward with a better mind. But do I honestly think that will happen? I'm skeptical. I don't know. Maybe in some tiny way, I've been able to be a voice to help validate the pain of many of these parents and students through this work that I've done to help them know that they've been seen and loved. I would love it if Biola would do that as well, but I don't feel optimistic about that happening. But I did have an insight. I think it's a very important insight, and it kind of changed my mind about some things about the core problem in all of this. Because, as you're digging down, you're trying to figure out, like, what is the real issue here? Why are we in this situation? And I think that if I explain this, it'll help make sense of this entire confusing situation at Biola. So I want to read from a public statement that is on the Biola website. This is called The Principles of Free Expression and Diversity of Thought. Biola's commitment to diversity of thought is rooted in a foundational commitment to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the truth of Scripture. It is shaped by 3 documents: Articles of Faith, Statement of Biblical Principles, and Unity Amidst Diversity, Theological Statement on Diversity. These unite our community and provide the boundaries that form Biola's institutional identity. Within our theological statements, freedom of thought is understood as a virtue to be cherished and not a vice to be shunned. I think this statement is very revelatory, and it gives us both some insights into what's happened and how we got into this situation, as well as maybe a possibility of a way forward. So first of all, we need to understand that Biola does have boundaries. This is not some completely off the rails progressive free fall. Now, have there been some mistakes and missteps? I would say yes. But as I've said repeatedly, like Biola's boundaries are still solid. And when you're building a house, even if the frame becomes corrupt or unstable, the frame can be rebuilt, but the foundation must be strong. And I think that to Biola's credit, they have some really strong foundation here, especially in the Articles of Faith and the position statements. I'm less enthusiastic about the diversity statement. To me, that's a pretty unhelpful document, but that's an opinion. That'd be a whole other podcast. But back in 2021, I met with two very high-ranking administrators at Biola. And I've mentioned this story before, but I want to revisit it for just a minute because I think it's helpful to explain the point that I want to make. Now, these gentlemen, they were in, like I said, top-level positions. They were steering the university, we'll say. And they were in a position to hire people, fire people, and make policies. And I asked these gentlemen in that meeting if the spectrum of hiring at Biola, and again, this is 2021, so keep that in mind, is everything from my friend Thaddeus Williams to the anti-capitalist, critical social justice promoting sociology department chair, Brad Christensen. And like, that's the spectrum of hiring. And at that time, those administrators said very directly and unequivocally to me, yes, that both of those positions were on the spectrum that Biola considers of people to have beliefs that are consistent with their statement of faith. Now, at the time, I don't think I really understood what they were saying, but it finally clicked for me a few days ago. And what these administrators were telling me, I now realize, and again, this is 4.5 years ago or so, is that they didn't consider the articles of faith nor the position statements to disallow staff and faculty from having beliefs and promoting beliefs along the lines of critical social justice, liberation theology, the critical social theories, and DEI. They could rightfully employ someone like Brad Christensen and still be in the bounds of the statement of diversity of thought. Now, again, I do want to point out that this was during the era of the provost, Debbie Taylor. And so maybe we could say at that time, what they were telling me was the position of the university, not their personal positions. It's a possibility. But here's the thing, is that Biola still employs people who are sympathetic to the kinds of things that Dr. Christensen is also sympathetic to. Biola employs those people today, right now, in this minute. There are those people there. And yes, I have been told that maybe approximately 30 or so progressive-leaning faculty and staff have parted ways with the university in the last couple of years. Some of them self-selected out. Maybe they retired or they moved on to another job. Some of them maybe had their positions eliminated due to budget cuts or other things. Some of them, I think there's in a couple of situations, they had departments eliminated, probably due to low enrollment. But there are still a number of staff and faculty who I would say are progressive leaning. Now, are they in the majority? No, I don't believe so. What I don't know is how many of them there are. I don't know if it's a third of the staff, a quarter of the staff. It might be 10 people. I do not know that number. But I do know from what I can see on the website that there are still some there, and some of them are quite prominent still. Now, originally, when I wrote this podcast, I was going to highlight 3 of these people, and I was going to show all those receipts and go through all of their public content. But as I was writing this, I decided not to do that. And I changed my mind because honestly, Biola already knows who these people are. They hired them, they promoted them, they've given them tenure in some cases, they've put them up as chapel speakers, they've put them in charge of residence life people, and in some cases they work as department chairs. So trust me, the top level administrators at Biola know exactly who these progressive people are. And I don't have time to keep playing whack-a-mole with the Biola administration so that they can react to whatever I found next. I have other things to do. I want to write a book. I got other stuff I got to do. And so I can't keep playing onesies, twosies with Biola administrators. So what I have to do is shift my mind into radical acceptance of the current reality. And that current reality is that Biola is a mixture of many faithful Christian workers and some unknown number of kind of center and center left workers. People who promote a lot of postmodern ideas, things like critical social justice and so on. Now, I do wish that Biola would stop gaslighting us, particularly the administrators would stop gaslighting us by continually repeating that their statement of faith is the lone bulwark against them engaging in more progressive leaning hiring, because that's how we got here. that statement of faith has been there all the time. Like, we have to acknowledge how we got here. And I think that Biola needs to recognize, even if it can't announce it externally, they've got to acknowledge, the administrators need to acknowledge that between about the years 2009 to 2022, that they engaged in pretty wide scale, intentional hiring of people who hold postmodern ideas. I also wish the Biola administrators would stop gaslighting the parents and alumni, acting like Brad Christensen is the only problem, that he's just a lone wolf out there. And I think it would kind of stink to be Brad Christensen and where your employer's acting like you're the only one that has these more progressive leaning ideas, when there's really a number of other people there. They're just not, Biola isn't acknowledging that they're there. They might try to hide them from donors and alumni, but they're there. And so I think that, at some point in the past, Biola really thought that hiring people like Brad Christensen and others was a good idea. And so there has to be a level of accountability about that at some point in the past, there were people in place who thought that hiring people with more progressive leaning views was consistent with the theological diversity. Now, I know that there are some parents who don't want to see what's happening. They don't want to believe me. And that's fine. You don't have to believe me. But just because Biola has been great for your kid, it doesn't mean that there aren't still some structural issues that need attention. And we need to be in the current reality that Biola still employs faculty who are shaped by feminist theory and liberation theology and so on. And I could clearly see this just by doing a simple Google search. So let me close this out by quoting my grandfather, who is one of the greatest evangelists that I know. And he would used to say at the end of a presentation of the gospel, he would say the phrase, "It's decision time." And I want to say to Biola, it's decision time. The administration is standing at a pivotal moment, and they must make a choice. They can't keep doing this like middle third way kind of thing where we want to be just conservative enough to not offend the people on the right. We want to be just progressive enough under the banner of love for neighbor to not offend the people on the left. Like, the Biola administration really needs to plant their flag in the ground and make a choice, because both sides are frustrated. We both see what you're doing. We see through it, and we're all a little tired. And if they want to keep doing the whole hiring of spectrum views thing, okay. But if that's the road that they choose, I think that at some point the conservatives are just going to have to say, all right, let them. We got to stop fighting so hard for something that the administrators don't really want. And they are telling us who they are. And so we should just believe them and accept and engage in radical acceptance of the current reality. And that drift is likely and inevitable. The second option, I think personally, is the better path, is that the only way out of this mess is for Biola's administrators to do the hard work of using the existing documents, the statement of faith, the position statements that are already in place, the things they've already adopted, and to begin to show how those statements are incompatible with the ideologies of feminist theory, liberation theology, the critical social theories, and other postmodern ideas like diversity, equity, inclusion. Maybe there's some way that the remaining conservative intellectuals, Christian thinkers that are left at Biola, hopefully there's enough of them, that they can figure out how to use the existing boundaries to show that those beliefs are incompatible with these postmodern ideologies. Now, the longer route, I think, would be to set up a study committee and come up with a summary of the school's beliefs on these issues. I think that could be complicated. I think it could take a while. Although I did suggest to the idea in that meeting, something like that probably could have been written by now. But given the lateness of the hour, I think that would be a little bit of the longer road. But that's the fork in the road where we're standing right now. Is if Biola's going to either keep doing the we hired on a diversity of views thing, or they're going to have to plant their flag and be courageous and figure out how to disallow these postmodern ideologies based on their current statements of faith. That's the only way that I see out of this. Now, there might be some other way I haven't thought of, but to me, those are the choices that are available. And so we need to be watching publicly for which of these paths that they choose. Perhaps if they can shore up their commitment to inerrancy and the authority of Scripture, maybe some more of these progressive leaning people will self-select out. Maybe that'll happen. Who knows? But based on what I know right now, there is a remnant of these people who, many of whom were brought in between the years of 2009 and 2022. And a lot of these people that they hired on a spectrum of beliefs that are still employed right now, today, maybe Biola needs to just understand that there's a level of accountability about that they're sitting in some consequences for those decisions. But as for me, I am kind of not going to keep playing whack-a-mole with them and pointing these people out. I don't have that kind of time. But for now, hopefully the public pressure will continue. Maybe other people will make videos about their experiences at Biola. Maybe other people will explain what they have seen. That would be great. But at least for now, the ball's in their court. I see you, Biola. I hope you choose well.